Joining us right now on the Boardwalk kind of hotline, he is the host of the Bleav and Draft Analyst on the Bleav Podcasting Network, also NFL Draft Analyst for Pro Football Network. He is Tony Pauline joining us right now on the Boardwalk kind of hotline. Tony, how you doing this Monday?
I'm okay. Thank you for having me.
I appreciate you jumping on, and I want to start with what you guys talking about on the pod over the weekend was the Senior Bowl, and that is, I feel like every year at the Senior Bowl, there are guys that stand out and guys take serious step back. So who are a couple guys for you when you're evaluating these guys heading into the draft this year that maybe took the best steps forward and maybe a guy who took the biggest step back?
I thought Mac Jones really helped himself. Mac Jones had a lot riding on the line. There were a lot of naysayers, such as myself, who thought that Mac Jones was primarily the beneficiary of the talent at Alabama, but he proved at the Senior Bowl that he made the talent work at Alabama because he was right on with his accuracy. His pass placement was terrific. The timing that he showed with receivers that were basically strangers and foreigners to him 48 hours earlier was outstanding. He was always in command and control of the offense. Thought he did a great job. I think Quinn Miners, the small school offensive lineman from Wisconsin Whitewater, was fantastic. He played center. He played guard. He dominated everybody. And when I mean everybody, I'm talking about big-time talent, Patrick Jones of Pittsburgh and one-on-ones, Odighizuwa of UCLA, Taquan Graham of Texas. I mean, just annihilated those guys at the point of attack. Absolutely did what a small school player has got to do. Richie Grant, the safety from Central Florida, answered questions about his ball skills, was picking off passes every day. I Bleav he had 2 picks the last day. As far as a player I think hurt himself, I got to say I was very disappointed in Spencer Brown, the big right tackle from Northern Iowa. He's a guy who I thought was underrated, and he basically looked like a guy who hadn't played football in a year, which he hasn't because Northern Iowa did not have a season in 2020, or they delayed their season, and he was constantly getting pushed back and getting annihilated at the point. And the guy, 6'8", 320 pounds, I was expecting more from Spencer Brown.
You mentioned the guys who were not playing this year. I want to ask you about that. How is it evaluating guys who didn't play for a year? Because we know so many times that repetitions is what makes guys get better. And without those repetitions, it's hard to know if they're really getting better. And I look at not just the guy that you just mentioned, but maybe Jamar Chase. These guys, we know how talented they are, but how hard is it to evaluate somebody and know what they could be without an entire year of those repetitions?
Well, it is, but I think, Jamar Chase, he's a real good player. And what we know about LSU receivers are they're usually better NFL players, better NFL receivers than they are in college. But I think your point is right on. You look at a guy like Caleb Farley that people are talking about as a top 12 pick. I mean, Caleb Farley throughout his career was very inconsistent. He showed flashes of brilliance, but he was never a consistent lockdown cornerback. So I think a guy like Caleb Farley is a roll of the dice. If you take him in the top 20 picks, I mean, there's no guarantee. Trey Lance, another guy that people talk about as being a very early first-round pick, played 1 game this season, and it was not any of his fault because North Dakota State only played 1 game this season, and he's a guy that has 1 year starting experience on the 1AA level. I think those guys that didn't play this year, whether because their seasons were postponed to the spring or whether they chose to opt out, most of them anyway, except for the Jamar Chases and the Penny Sewells, I think there's a lot of downside risk, and those are the guys that may take a little bit longer to produce at the next level if they produce at all.
Tony Pauline joining us here on the Boardwalk kind of hotline here on Game Night on 97.3 ESPN. You can follow him on Twitter at Tony Pauline, of course, the co-host of the Bleav and Draft Analyst podcast on the Bleav Podcasting Network, also NFL Draft Analyst at ProFootballNetwork.com. Tony, here in the Philadelphia area, one of the big topics this offseason is going to be the Eagles with the 6th overall pick in the draft. Eagles haven't had this high of a pick of their own, before they traded up to get Carson Wentz, but of their own since they drafted Lane Johnson. So, in your mind, is there a player or players out there who make the most sense for the Eagles?
Well, they got to figure out if Andre Dillard is in their future plans or whether they're going to move on from him and then kind of hope that maybe Penny Sewell slides down. I don't think that's going to happen. They need a receiver. I doubt Jamar Chase is going to be there. Do they look to a Devonta Smith? What are they going to do at the quarterback position? I don't know, or it didn't seem like any definitive decision has been made. What if one of the quarterbacks falls down? One of those two quarterbacks, either being Zach Wilson of BYU or Justin Fields, or does it cost that much? Can they move up a few slots? I think they're in a tough position in the sense that they've got an early pick. They should get a good player, but it may not be the player that they want or the player that many of the fans are hoping for, whether that be the Jamar Chase, whether that be the Penei Sewell, or maybe even one of the quarterbacks if they are ready to move on from Carson Wentz.
You mentioned Devonta Smith. You guys mentioned on the podcast about the fact that he wouldn't weigh in down at the Senior Bowl, and that's such an odd thing. I don't think I've ever heard of a receiver not willing to weigh in. How concerning is that, and what kind of impact may it have on his draft evaluation for teams like the Eagles who say, look, we like this guy in college, but is his frame maybe a little bit too lean for the NFL level?
It's not just that he didn't weigh in. He didn't do anything. I mean, what the hell was he doing in Mobile? He didn't practice. He didn't take repetitions. He wouldn't weigh in. Why was he on the roster? Why was he taking somebody else's spot? So it was just a couple of things. Devonta Smith is a great receiver. There's no doubt about it. I always said that he was the most complete receiver of the Alabama crew that we've seen in recent years. Jalen Waddle this year, Jerry Jeudy last year, Henry Ruggs last year. But he's got a smaller frame. So he's not a good fit for every offense. He's eventually going to have to get on the scale and weigh in. And, if he comes in at 175 pounds, 178 pounds, people are going to wonder, is that his real playing weight? What was he actually 10 pounds lighter at the Senior Bowl, which is his actual playing weight, which is why he wouldn't get on the scale. So, there will be some team that overlooks that and just looks at the film and what a terrific receiver this guy is and selects him, I think, within the first 10 to 15 picks of the draft. But the fact is, it was not just the weigh-ins. It was the fact that he's on the Senior Bowl roster. He doesn't get on the scale, and he does nothing all week while other guys are out there practicing.
Now, you mentioned the other guys practicing. We know that there's a lot of talk about the receivers in this draft. We mentioned Jamar Chase. We mentioned Devonta Smith. We know his teammate Waddle. Is there a guy maybe flying under the radar right now that you think could make a major impact at the NFL level? Because we know for the Eagles and their fans, there's a lot of questions, like you said, about the wide receiver position.
If you're talking early in the draft, and early being top 15 picks, I happen to love Rondale Moore of Purdue. A little bit short, 5'9", probably goes about 180 pounds, but he is explosive. He has legitimate game-breaking speed, but he's also a very good receiver. He's also a very good pass catcher. They run a lot of receiver screens, or they ran a lot of receiver screens for him at Purdue, and his explosion and quickness and burst in the first 3 yards was unlike any that I've ever seen. So that is a guy that, early on I think is going to be very underrated. If you're looking at day 2, a guy like, if you're looking for a field stretcher, Diami Brown, the underclassman from North Carolina who's coming off of 2 terrific years, 2 terrific seasons. He's a guy that, has opposing cornerbacks consistently playing back on their heels. If you're looking for a last day guy, someone who really stood out at the receiver position was Austin Watkins of UAB, who's been a good receiver the past 2 years at UAB. Not the fastest guy in the world, but a great route runner, exceptionally quick, sure-handed, and someone who was able to separate on the college level. And with the route running skills he showed during the Senior Bowl, he should be able to separate the next level, no problem.
Tony, the guy that I've been preaching for the last couple of weeks, I personally think the Eagles should take, not that they actually listen to me at all, but I think the Eagles need to take Patrick Surtain from Alabama, because it's been a long time since this organization has had a blue-chip guy in that secondary. Tell the audience about Patrick Surtain and what makes him special.
Great size, incredible athleticism. Obviously, the bloodlines are there. This is the day and age of your taller safeties. He's going to go about 6'1". He plays fast. He plays physical. Sometimes he plays out of control. Sometimes he doesn't make plays with his back to the ball. But I think he's one of those guys that has got huge upside. He's not a Jeffrey Okudah. He's not as polished as many of the Ohio State corners, Denzel Ward, that we've seen come out and have been early picks and have been immediate starters. But he's got huge upside. The problem with Surtain is there may be a lot of bumps in the road early for him because he's got to learn to get his head back around, position himself against receivers to make plays. If you get the best of Patrick Surtain and you can coach him to get the best out of him, you've got a lockdown corner for years to come.
Tony Pauline joining us here on the Boardwalk Kind of Hotline here on Game Night on 97.3 ESPN. You can follow him on Twitter at Tony Pauline. Check out the Bleav in Draft Analyst podcast and the Bleav Podcasting Network. Also, all of his coverage over at ProFootballNetwork.com. Tony, I'd be remiss if I didn't touch on the quarterbacks with you because that's the sexy position. That's the thing everybody loves to hyper-analyze and talk about. Explain to the audience out there what is going on with this draft class, because I feel like there's a lot of misinformation and confusion when it comes to the guys after Trevor Lawrence. Fields, Wilson, Trey Lance, Mac Jones, Kyle Trask. I feel like depending on who you ask what day of the week, you might get a different answer from certain people who are covering this.
You will, but the first two guys that you mentioned, Justin Fields and Zach Wilson, are legitimate early draft picks. I mean, if Trevor Lawrence was in this draft, they'd be in the conversation for the first pick of the draft. They may not be the first, but they would be in that conversation, and they're going to be top 5 picks. There are different types of quarterbacks. Fields is the strong-armed athlete who can make all the throws and get the deep pass downfield with great speed and velocity. Zach Wilson is more the thinking man's quarterback. He's the cerebral guy. He's a guy that processes everything quickly, doesn't have the arm strength of Fields, but he makes a lot of plays. He's a timing passer who knows what's happening on the field. Trey Lance, like I said before, he's got great upside. He's probably going to be a mid-first-round pick. But with Trey Lance, with the inexperience at the quarterback position, he's only played it for 1 year as a starter. You may have to sit him for a year. I think with Mac Jones, you could make the argument that after Trevor Lawrence, there's no quarterback in this draft that is as NFL ready as Mac Jones. He doesn't have the physical skills of Justin Fields. He may not have the foot quickness or the ability to make plays outside the pocket of Zach Wilson, but I think, you can plug him in. He just doesn't have the upside. Kyle Trask, if it was 1986 or 1991, Kyle Trask would probably be a top 15 pick. He's a great classic pocket passer. But in this day and age of RPO quarterbacks and quarterbacks that you want mobility in, he falls short, which is why he's going to push down draft boards. If you're looking for a sleeper at the quarterback position, a day 2 sleeper, Davis Mills of Stanford. Great size, great arm strength, but a guy that, sort of like Trey Lance, is going to need some coddling, is going to need some time before he's NFL ready.
I'm very curious also about, and I don't say this to be negative about Trask, but, one of the things about him that kind of worries me a little bit, and you can tell me how wrong I am about this, because I probably am wrong about this. I kind of go back to when Tim Couch came out of Kentucky and how high-powered that offense was, and I almost felt like he was a byproduct of the offense, and when he got to the NFL, he was maybe exposed a little bit more than people even expected him to be. Is Kyle Trask a product of that Dan Mullen offense?
No, I don't think so. I also think the problem with Tim Couch was the Cleveland Browns, took him so early on, but they did nothing to protect him. He was just getting the crap beat out of him, and that's going to be a problem for any quarterback. You use an early pick on a quarterback, you better make sure that you protect him. Couch was never protected. Trask has been a solid quarterback the past 2 years. I mean, you look at the system there. Obviously, Kyle Pitts, the tight end from Florida, is going to be a very early selection. They've had a couple of good receivers there in Tony this year, who's elevated his draft stock. But I think that, Trask has been a main mover, a common denominator in that offense that has been really a catalyst for it. It's just that he does not have the mobility or the foot speed or the agility that teams want in a quarterback. He's your classic drop-back pocket passer.
Jay, one more question about the quarterbacks for you. I appreciate you answering all these questions. When I think about also how many times we've seen all those quarterbacks, like in 2018, all the quarterbacks drafted in the first round. So how many do you think actually will go in the first round this year?
Before Senior Bowl week, I thought it was going to be 4. Lawrence, Justin Fields, Zach Wilson, and Trey Lance. But after watching Mac Jones last week, I think there's a better than 75% chance that he ends up in the first round. And remember, Eagle fans should know this firsthand. The Senior Bowl is a kingmaker at the quarterback position. We saw Carson Wentz go from a late first-round pick to the second pick of the draft because of his performance at the Senior Bowl. So while the Senior Bowl sometimes is overhyped, there are some positions, quarterback being number one. If you talk about Phillip Rivers, you talk about Carson Palmer. I mean, guys who just went there and had knockout weeks. Donovan McNabb, another one who had a great week, and the Eagles took early on. That really helped enhance quarterback draft stock. So I think there's a very good chance, to answer your question, I'm going off the rails here, very good chance that 5 quarterbacks are taken in the first round, with Mac Jones being that 5th.
No, nothing wrong with going off the rails. We like the insight here on 97.3 ESPN. You mentioned Carson Wentz. How is he, from what you projected him to be going into the draft versus what he has become? Because there's a lot of conflicting opinions in this area. A lot of people in this area, Tony, some people still love him. They think he can still be 2017 guy. Some people think that he's a broken clock and he can't be fixed. So what do you think of him from what you evaluated him to be back in 2016 to what he has become?
Well, I didn't think that it would come to this point where they made all those draft picks and now his future is in question. That's for sure. I thought that he would be further along, especially what he showed early in his career. But I think, number one, he just had a lot of injuries, and number two, there was the situation with the coach just went sour, and those are two very bad intangibles for any quarterback. Can he pull it together? I mean, I hope so. Besides, you don't want to see a guy like that fail, especially a guy with that sort of personality, although I know there are a lot of Eagles fans, even in this area, and I'm in the New York area where there are a lot of Eagles fans who were sort of rooting against him. I just want him to stick with Jalen Hurts. I think he's a physically talented guy. I think it's between the ears for Carson Wentz.
He's Tony Pauline. You can follow him on Twitter at Tony Pauline. He's the NFL draft analyst for ProFootballNetwork.com. And don't forget the Bleav in Draft Analysts podcast and the Bleav Podcasting Network. Catch all of his insights all the way leading up to the NFL draft. That's all guests. He appeared today on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Tony, great stuff. Appreciate you jumping on the show today.
Thanks for having me.